Hello guys, hope you're all doing well. So in this one, I wanted to compare TrackIR head tracking in ArmA 3, which will roughly set you back about 170 quid, depending on your currency and location, with a much cheaper alternative called FaceTrackNoIR. Before I get into this video though, I'm running a giveaway for official printouts of the ArmA 2 and ArmA 3 maps, which you can unfold and stick on your wall like the true ArmA veteran you are. They include Chernerus, Takistan, Malden, Tanoa, Altis and Stratus maps, as well as some Operation Flashpoint and ArmA 2 postcards. If you're interested, I've linked the Gleam giveaway details in the description. Now, if you want a bit more information about what TrackIR is, I've already made a video review which you can find here. But for now, we're going to focus on what makes FaceTrack different. The general gist of both of these products is that they enable you to use a part of your body, i.e. your real life head, to control your in-game character's head, which as you know assists with flying in ArmA games, but it's also especially useful in flight sims where you need to be looking around your cockpit constantly. Now, as I've mentioned, TrackIR will roughly set you back 170 quid, with the bulk of that cost coming from the infrared tracker, which sits on your monitor. I don't know why it costs so much, but it's obviously very special and very clever, so let's leave it alone. On the other hand, FaceTrack is simply a piece of software which lies behind a £2.90 paywall. All you need is your head, and I'm not sure how many people who still watch my videos have that, and a webcam. It's much more lightweight, it doesn't require baseball caps with infrared stickers or black antenna on the side of your headset that make you look like an alien attempting communication with Area 51. But as a result, the trade-off is increased latency between your real-life head movements and the input to the game, as well as slightly less reliable tracking accuracy. But really, for the cost, it's well worth a punt. The software is very similar to TrackIR's own homebrewed one, where you have the ability to create and save profiles, seamlessly switch to different games, and adjust the sensitivity curves for each of the 6 degrees of movement. If you're interested in trying out my personal settings, I've linked them down below. Now, once FaceTrack has detected your facial geometry, it will lock onto you like Maverick on a Russian MiG, and you will be able to see yourself in the preview window looking like a creepy yellow stickman. Great. Now, in terms of the software staying locked onto you or acquiring your face in the first place, this all varies from face to face, webcam to webcam, lighting conditions to lighting conditions. My view of facial lock-on reliability is very subjective and will vary for you. One thing I've learnt though is that the higher refresh rate you have on your webcam, the less latency there will be on FaceTrack. One thing I would also say is that if you have a webcam just sitting there, it's really a no-brainer to at least spend the couple bucks on the software and to see how you fare. The software, while very similar to TrackIR's, doesn't unfortunately let you zoom in to the curves to get a detailed adjustment, and because there's no physical tracker on your head, there's no sensitivity option. Because of this, you will have to be very patient with the software. I'd recommend windowing your game as I've done here and hopping in and out of in-game flight to see for yourself what does and doesn't work well. Soldier on though, I was close to giving up a lot of times, but you just have to persevere and keep practicing with it. I think part of my impatience arose from the fact that I was so used to the speediness of TrackIR, but once you get it running, it was actually very surprising what you can do. The developer, who's a guy called Wim, seems like a very sound chap who cares about his software, updating it regularly, and taking into account feedback from its users. And while it bears little relevance on how well the software performs, he's had quite a lot of health-related misfortunes, as detailed on the website. So you're not only supporting the software's development, but the person behind it as well, which is nice. Now I'm going to begin to scrutinize, compare and contrast the differences between TrackIR and FreeTrack in ArmA 3 helicopter flight, beginning with general flight first of all, so you can get a good flavour of how the two stack up against each other. So, as a control variable for my experiments, I've set up an editor scenario on Altis where I have flown around roughly the same locations, doing similar sort of maneuvers to help me to arrive at a fair conclusion. General flight works pretty well in FreeTrack. Took me a while to get the software curves to work to my liking for certain head movements I'm used to with TrackIR, like this looking up and into my turns camera maneuver. This is quite difficult for software to get right, as you're asking for it to cater to two different axes of movement, one upwards and one horizontal, but with enough tweaking I managed to find the sweet spot, and I was looking into my turns as I do with TrackIR. It's worth noting what kinds of missions you're planning on playing. If you're going for fast-paced stuff like King of the Hill, where you need to be panning around quickly, the responsiveness isn't quite up to scratch for me. But if you're just troop ferrying in helos on Invade and Annex and the odd milsim operation, this will fare just fine. The creme de la creme, landings. Now, as you might remember from my very first helicopter tutorial, I recommended to increase your field of view if you couldn't shell out for something like TrackIR because of the importance of seeing the bottom of your cockpit during the final stages of landing. You'll see I do this a lot in my bleed flare landings, where I need to look at my feet to suss out the type of ground clutter I'm headed for and how quickly I'm about to touch down. For this ability alone, to be able to look at your feet without the expenses of TrackIR, FreeTrack is worth it alone. However, in terms of how well it works, the sluggishness, which again is subjective and down to the limitations of my webcam, was something that really put me off. I just couldn't do the kind of quick landings where I flick my head down to see my feet. However, this may just be a muscle memory thing where I'm so used to the responsiveness of TrackIR. Don't get me wrong, you can do some nice landings, but there were a few moments where I was shaking my head and thinking, nah, this wasn't quick enough. That would have been fatal in a multiplayer environment. So I'll say it again, if you're using this in high octane multiplayer situations where a lot of people are relying on you for safe transport, you need to really factor in the latency of FreeTrack when you're on your final approaches. For takeoffs, FreeTrack and TrackIR are actually very well matched. Usually when I lift off, I begin orbiting as I depart and I look up with my head as I do so. TrackIR does this nicely and it captures my head movement exactly. When I do the same thing with FreeTrack, it is similar. Yes, the latency is there and you can feel the lag a little, but it's quick enough for me to do what I do and to see any obstacles as I take off. It seems like FreeTrack does better with looking up movements rather than looking down camera movements. From what I can tell, this may be because the light bouncing off of your face is more visible when you look up, but when you look down, you're in the shadows more, and so it lacks the good lighting to detect your facial geometry. In short, takeoffs are good enough with FreeTrack, but don't expect anything really quick and responsive like you might see in the kinds of ones I do in my videos. But then again, what kinds of flight sim pilots do the kinds of crazy maneuvers I do? One of the really cool and badass things you can do with a head tracker while flying helos is a sort of circle strafe orbit where you pan around an object or target like so, usually for recon purposes. TrackIR has this tactical part covered very well, where you can look to your side as you circle and scout for moving targets scurrying about on the ground below. FreeTrack is also pretty good, but its responsiveness problem flags up again, where I often find myself trying to follow moving targets with my head and I end up waiting for the game camera to catch up up with my actual head movements. I wouldn't rely on it for recon, as the tracking is very flaky when you're looking to the side from what I've experienced. It might just be my weird ass face, but FreeTrack kept losing its tracking if I looked even slightly too much to the left or right during an orbit. This brings me on to panning. Sometimes when you're flying, you want to be able to look at a building, a tree, whatever in the distance and use it as a reference point for a landing or gauge of your speed and altitude. I do this a lot when I'm sussing out landing spots and I'm trying to figure out whether or not I can fit my helo in a certain space. When you're panning, you need the camera to scooch over to a particular spot and stay there, fixed, so you can observe and make a decision. Now, I will say, up to this point, FreeTrack had been an absolute joy to use, but this was really where it was lacking. I just could not get the curves to play nicely, no matter how much I played around with the settings, so I could look to my left or right and hold the camera there. It's as if the software freaks out when you stop moving, and this causes jittering and or a complete loss of facial tracking. It's really finicky and it just didn't feel natural, whereas on TrackIR I could look left and right with great detail without any juddering or flickering. This again appears to be a limitation not really of the software, but of how much data can be captured by a human face on a webcam. Pawning and gunship flight gave me a similar outcome, unfortunately. Yes, you can do it, but the latency piled on with my head's automatic reflex to look up as an enemy passes above me actually created quite a lot of motion sickness for me, and I had to take a break after playing so I didn't fill my keyboard with puke. Now, I didn't really think this was a muscle memory lapse where I'm just so used to TrackIR at this point. Rather, it was something where I was pushing the capabilities of FreeTrack so much with my flying style where the software just couldn't keep up with my crazy maneuvers. So in short, if you're going heads to heads, pardon the pun, with other live multiplayer aircraft in ArmA, I would be very careful about relying on FreeTrack too much for your in-game situational awareness. Infantry. I hate it with a passion. I always get shot in the foot with a Type 115 sniper bullet and I respawn with rage and return back to flying where I belong. But some of you guys will find it useful to know about how these two products fare when on the ground. TLDR, FreeTrack just doesn't cut it here. When I'm on the ground using TrackIR, I need my head tracking to be able to do two things: pan and zoom at detailed objects when I'm scouting, and quickly flinch at potential fire positions that enemies could spring up from when I'm in close quarters. Unfortunately, FreeTrack just couldn't do it for me. Yes, there is a degree of latency even with TrackIR, and a disparity between what the game represents and what your real life head does, but it just wasn't snappy or natural enough for me. It felt like I was trying to look at an open area where an enemy could fire at me from, and my mind was already trying to figure out whether or not there was someone there, but the game camera hadn't caught up with me yet. If you're planning on joining a server and lighting up all the fools with your primary, you're probably doing it wrong if you're relying on a head tracker anyway. Truthfully, this is for pilots who want a bit more situational awareness and to free up their hands so they can focus on the helo controls. In this regard, I can't recommend FreeTrack enough. It's got intuitive enough software, a solid list of supported games, and pretty damn good accuracy during landings and takeoffs, which is where it really matters if you're in a helicopter. You're saving about £168 by not shelling out for TrackIR, so it's worth giving it a shot if you want to see what all the fuss about head tracking is all about. I hope this video was helpful for all of you budding pilots out there. Drop me a comment and a sub if you enjoyed watching. Now, this was actually quite a fun comparison to make, but before I fully close off the video, I have an important personal announcement to make about what I'm going to be doing in the coming months. Basically, I'm enrolled on a law conversion course at university, which is essentially 3 years of a law degree rolled into 8 grisly months of my life. Yes. As a result, I want to give you guys a heads up that if my content suddenly goes off a slope, you'll know where I've gone and it's not forever. I hope you guys understand that sometimes there are more boring things in life that you just have to attend to. Have a great week and thank you for watching as always. TOMMEH out.